we've had all kinds of hot hatches, maybe hot, warm, lukewarm, cold, all temperatures.
For me, Fiat are sort of, really the champions of the hot hatch in India.
So we've had all the makings of a hot hatch if it had the right engine and performance.
Since we are talking practicality also needs to be into the mix, we've actually had some very strong diesel hatchbacks as well.
For me, if you want to get into hot hatch territory, given the performance standard of mainstream turbo right now, you need to be in the low 9 seconds, 0 to 100. Hello and welcome to episode 20 of Deep Drive, our weekly podcast powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. Now, other than YouTube, you can also listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'm Hormazd Sorabjee. Today we have an interesting topic and I turn to my colleague Sergius.
Yeah, Hormazd, very interesting topic. This one's for the enthusiasts out there. Hot hatches, right? And I think when I say enthusiasts out there, it includes both of us here as well. Hormazd, hot hatches, they've been back in the news now with the Racer and the N line, the two sort of hot or warm. We can discuss that hatches back. But before we get into them, you've probably driven all of the hot hatches we've had in India. So what, in your opinion, was our first hot hatch? Which would you consider the first hot?
Yeah, I think you're right. We've had all kinds of hot hatches, maybe hot, warm, lukewarm, cold, all temperatures.
True.
And really, as you said, now with the Tata Altroz Racer kind of back in the news, are we going to see a resurgence of hot hatches? That's what you're going to talk about. But as you said, let's just go back to a bit of history. I mean, hot hatches, let's say in Europe, been around since the 70s. I think the one that really kind of became an icon as far as hot hatches was a Golf GTI.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing car. It really kind of put the concept of a hot hatch out there as an ordinary hatch that could, deliver sometimes, sports car slaying performance.
True.
But have we had that in India? To be honest, not quite. And I think the first hot hatch, I would say, I don't know whether you could term it that now, definitely not. But at that time, probably it was. It had just 50 horsepower, 0 to 100 in 16 seconds. And it was the Maruti Zen.
Okay.
I think, if you look at it, when it came out in 1993, what did we have? We just had a Maruti 800 and nothing else really off. That was really quick. And I think the Zen at that time also embodied the latest technology. I mean, it looked quite good. It had that cheeky jelly bean styling, what they call. So I think before we go ahead, let's see what defines a hot hatch. It has to be the looks.
Yeah.
It has to be a certain amount of handling. And it has to be performance.
Right.
I think looks and performance in India is absolutely, key because handling, you really can't get the most out of the car's dynamics on a public road. You'd need to go to a really secluded road or a racetrack. But coming back to the Zen, I think it looked quite cheeky, though it did look a bit odd because, it had a very big front overhang. I think what people don't know, the Zen was actually the Suzuki servo mode, which originally had a 660cc engine. So to accommodate this 1 liter, 4-cylinder engine, it really had to be elongated. And that, to me, it even messed up the dynamics a bit. I was never a fan of the Zen's handling, to be honest. A lot of people talked about it. It was a bit too nose heavy. Steering also didn't have the kind of feel an 800 had. 800, even today, it has one of the best rack and pinion steerings around, and it still feels great whenever we drive my old SS80. But really the Zen was, I would say, the first one. The engine was a real jewel to rev. Really buzzy engine.
All
aluminum. So it had that buzz. Super short stroke engine. So I think, it really would rev, no bottom end at all. And I think the Zen went on to become an icon because right into the 2000s and even now, it's the choice for a lot for underground racing.
Yeah.
Typical thing to happen was to put a 1.3 steam engine in it, and modify the hell out of it with Nios, with everything. Then Zen's even had Baleno 1.6 engine. These were all the G series engines, which were really, I think, probably Suzuki's best engines in terms of performance. Just the way they were responsive, they were buzzy. I would say the sportiest engine. I think that's the right word for it. The G series, especially the 1.3, was really the sportiest of the lot, and So I think, the Zen, I would say, was the first hot hatch, or it really became super hot
Started off.
once it got modified and into the drag racing scene. I mean, they're regular at drag meets. Yeah. So maybe a warm hatch, which with modifications became sizzling
Got
hot.
too hot.
Yeah.
And what was interesting that you mentioned the 1.3 liter engine being put into the Zen, because while we're on Maruti, I want to talk about what I think was a super missed opportunity for Maruti is the Swift. I mean, we had the 1.3 in that Swift.
Absolutely.
It wasn't a hot hatch because the Swift was bigger, heavier, and things like that. Swift Sport, they just never brought that to India. I mean, all the generations, that car had the looks, like you said. It had the handling. Still, I think, the Swift we can consider a fun to drive car, but it just needs a little extra oomph.
Right. The Swift had all the makings of a hot hatch if it had the right engine and performance.
True.
Styling, as we said, very important. Good handling, nimble, cheeky. So it could have done that. And again, do you remember we had the two-door Zen also?
Yes.
They had some export versions, carbon and steel, which they put into the market just to get those export versions out. So over there they could have put another engine. But I think honestly, looking at Maruti's attempts at hot hatches, they've actually failed miserably because they've nearly not focused on it. Maruti is not used to niche volumes. They're not. They think on a large scale. They're not hardwired to get into these niche segments. They tried with the Baleno RS.
Yeah, and with an imported engine, which is very unlike Maruti.
Didn't really work, and I don't even think it goes with the brand really. People look at Maruti as a conventional, efficient, reliable kind of vehicle. So I think, Maruti and hot hatches somehow just don't go together. Though the Zen did have a strong cult following. But I think the real hot hatch came about 7-8 years later, in 2001, and that was a Palio, the 1.6.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember driving that, absolutely fantastic, 0 to 100 time of 11 seconds, faster than even today's Altroz Racer, and 16-valve engine, naturally aspirated, superb steering, ride and handling of Fiats, which is absolutely outstanding, and you have to put it in perspective as to what was available then. Really nothing. Again, it was the Zen. Zen was still around, and otherwise you didn't have any other hatches. You had the Indica really, but it wasn't really quick at all. Though they had a petrol version, and though Indica also, they tried to kind of make some prototypes of their hot hatches, which they put Rally Sport, which they were pilot cars, or zero cars in a lot of the rally stages. So there's nothing around then. You had Santros, Zen, Matiz. So really the Palio, I think, in that way was the first real hot hatch.
No, absolutely. I fully agree on this. I remember driving the S10 version, which again had the bright yellow color. So,
Correct,
amped up.
With the Sachin Tendulkar.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was amazing. I mean, you could, on a loose surface, you could sort of break traction in second gear, forget first gear wheel spin. So it was fun. And I think for me, Fiat are sort of, really the champions of the hot hatch in India. Now I am a big Fiat fan for sure. I've had the Punto, the 90 horsepower diesel, of course, because I bought it before the Abarth came in. But they had the Abarth, brand.
The Abarth, but the Abarth is a story. It's actually in a way a sad story that, they put everything into it. They put the bigger engine, they put more powerful engine, as you said, 140 horsepower. True. They did raise it, which kind of compromised the handling for our roads. And I remember when they launched it at Bodh, social media went ballistic. You thought these cars were going to sell like hotcakes, but they didn't. It actually flopped. Which just goes to show that, the market for hot hatches is really, really very small. And when it comes to putting down money, people are hesitant because hot hatches, in a way are impulsive. Then at the end, when reality bites, they're not very fuel efficient. We need to talk about Sawmill. I wish he was here, who actually still owns an Abarth and still...
His second one.
But people like him, I think we can count on our fingers. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's really been the problem for manufacturers. How hot can you make a hot hatch? Because if you make it super hot, it becomes expensive and fuel efficiency drops.
Correct.
So you can't really blame them because while it's great to talk about having hot hatches, the market hasn't really been there for them. Again, a classic example is the Polo GTI.
Yeah. In fact, almost before we get to there, there's another one we shouldn't forget. Abarth, the 595C. Yeah, Fiat tried that in India too. really great hot hatch. I mean, I didn't like the gearbox, honestly.
Yeah,
It was
because the AMP,
terrible.
which was terrible.
Yeah, really terrible gearbox. Ride was super stiff, but man, that car looked, it sounded, it was quick.
I mean, it was good, but to be honest, those are niche hot hatches.
Right.
You just import that. But there are too many of them. You've got the MG45, you've got the minis and all that. Then they all become hot hatches. But, looking at the Indian hot hatch scene.
Right.
So I think, the Polo GTI, for example.
Right.
Again, I think that was really a true hot hatch. I think 180 horsepower, which was the...
Yeah, and the 1.8 liter.
That's right. So, I think they priced it at 26 lakhs. CBU, no one bought it then, just about 200 units. At the minute they dropped it, prices dropped, everyone went and bought it. So really, it's people, even in a hot hatch, they don't just buy it from the heart. You have to have some rational element to it. And that's what hot hatches are all about. It's about from the heart and also from the head, because hatches are practical. They are everyday vehicles.
Yeah.
And, what you want is just that little bit of performance in them.
Exactly. You're not really buying a two-door sort of coupe. You are looking at a sort of everyday car. You want that little bit of boot space. And
Exactly. And they've all been actually four-door cars.
Yeah.
If you see, I don't think we've had
we've had a few, like the Zen Carbon and Steel.
that's not really a hot hatch, because by then, I think it had moved on. So they were not, so other than that, we've really not had a three-door hot hatch, which again goes to show that no one will take that chance of compromising practicality. So hot hatch really about performance. Exactly. And, at the end of the day, I think people also want good design and styling and, all the add-ons. I think the frills, also the cosmetics make a big difference, especially in our market as well.
So, Hormazd, since we are talking practicality also needs to be into the mix, we've actually had some very strong diesel hatchbacks as well.
Yeah, Sergius, that's true. I never thought of that. We rule out diesel because, doesn't go with...
True.
But we had the 100 horsepower, Figo diesel.
Right.
And, I think with the hatch, with the diesel, because you could go up to 1.5 liters and turbocharge it to still get the sub 4 meter benefit. You really had some torquey, powerful diesels. That was there. I mean, interesting. But again, diesel is not very high revving and front and nose heavy. So don't give that sporty feel, but they have the performance. And I think we even had the 1.5 TDI in the Polo.
The Polo. Yeah.
So that also 110 horsepower, really very, very quick. Put a smile on your face. And before that, there was a 1.6 GT TDI, which was about 105 horsepower. And we forgot to mention that the Polo even had a 1.6 petrol.
Yeah.
Naturally aspirated was that old EA 111 engine, which was pretty outdated at that time, but it was still there. So clearly, that was an age where you had multiple engine options, even for hatchbacks, not like it is today, because clearly, they were easier in terms of regulation to bring and launch, even though the numbers may not have been big. But again, not quite that super hot as we would expect.
Not all the ingredients in the formula.
Exactly.
So while we're on VW, then we have to also talk about the other Polos, because frankly, I mean, I'm just looking at it, Hormazd. They've had, the 1 liter TSI. That one ducked below the 10-second mark, 0 to 100. Very quick car.
I think that was our genuine, proper, it was a mainstream car, which in a way was a hot hatch by default, because there was really nothing else around. I think I really missed that car.
Right.
The 1 liter TSI with the manual box. It was fantastic. But earlier we had the 1.2 TSI, which actually was a smoother engine. It had a really creamy, torquey engine, but it was a 7-speed DCT.
Right.
And I think, whilst DCT and twin clutches are great on very high-performance sports cars, I prefer them over there. I think for a hatch, there's nothing like a manual shift. So I think, I think really sad that the Polo went. It was really a very, very quick car. And, I think, I think since then we've really not had anything from Volkswagen in that, in that category.
Exactly. And, Hormazd, when we're talking about these cars, there's also another car which was by default a hot hatch, another brand, Hyundai, the Grand i10 Nios Turbo. Also a sub-10-second car, ridiculously fast on its own,
Well, yeah, that's true. I think, we've got to be I think we got to distinguish between cars with great performance and what are hot hatches.
Yeah, true.
So I mean, just looking at the shape, the style, it really didn't have those hot hatch credentials.
Exactly.
You've got to have the posing value as well, not just the performance. True. But you're right. I think what it shows is that, performance from mainstream cars now is so good that you really have to stand above them, or you have to be much, much quicker to kind of earn those hot hatch credentials. Yeah. Like the Zen, 30 years ago, you just had an 800. At that time, relative, you could perhaps call it a hot hatch, though it just had 50 horsepower and 0 to 160 seconds, which is laughable by today's standards. But I think today, if you're going to call your car a hot hatch, it's got to have a certain performance benchmark, which is way above what a standard mainstream hatch gives.
And I think Hyundai actually learned from that, Hormazd, because what they've done now with the i20 N-line, I think is very smart. So they have that, the engine, but they've really done it quite well. I mean, down to suspension, slightly stiffer. Even the exhaust is a little different. You get a little fruity note. Of course, the looks, the colors, outside in.
That's true. I think it does look from a, aesthetic point of view, it's got the sporty credentials. But honestly, Sergius, I think today, for me, if you want to get into hot hatch territory, given the performance standard of mainstream turbo right now, you need to be in the low 9 seconds, 0 to 100. That's what I think. Then you can now today qualify as a hot hatch. Today, even a Franx is pretty quick. Today, the Franx is faster than the Altroz Racer, which will...
Or the Citroen C3.
The Citroen C3, absolutely. I mean, today the Citroen...
Another 10 second, kind of 10.5 or 10.7 or something, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, and that's that's definitely not a hot hatch because it's a little soft, comfort oriented. But that 1.2 engine of Citroens, today I can say is the best 1.2 turbo petrol in the market. It is absolutely phenomenal.
Absolutely.
And I think, so these are benchmarks which you really have to exceed to beat them. And that brings us to the Altroz Racer, which I think, in a way, I'm disappointed that in terms of performance, it just hasn't delivered. Even the transmission, notchy gearbox and a clutch that is snappy. It's not progressive.
It is
exactly. I mean, great handling. It looks superb. I think the Altroz is a great looking car, but so let down by a powertrain. And in a way, it highlights Tata's inherent weakness in these engines. I mean, they should have waited for the 1.2 GDI, which is coming in the curve, and put that in over here.
That would be really hot.
Exactly, it would have been hotter. True. But I mean, and I'll be honest, Tata trying to show that his car is quicker than the i20 round the course circuit. I mean, honestly, that didn't fly. When you get a car with one is an automatic, one is a manual, and I think we've done a test, and clearly the i20 is even quicker. So really, Altroz, I mean, great potential to be a hot hatch, but it just needs that stronger engine.
True, absolutely. And almost talking of stronger engines, I'm going to go back a little bit just to jog your memory, because there's one thing that's stuck in sort of my head. When Maruti 800, now don't laugh, but when Maruti 800 went to the MPFI and 5-speed.
Yeah, the 800. FHD engine.
FHD, okay, yeah.
With the oval head.
Yeah, you had a picture of the Speedo maxed out.
Yeah, that's right. That was amazing. Yeah, we had the Speedo maxed out. Yeah, I mean, that was crazy. It was, to be honest, on the expressway before it had even opened. Those were really great days.
Right.
Expressway not open, we had access to it. So typically we were legally doing that. So you even printed that picture. But 800, ultra light, ultra unsafe at that time. And but that engine was a rocket. And, honestly, that's what I feel, we didn't get enough of was Suzuki. Just that, if you see, we opened up that cylinder head to take some photographs and just see the kind of artistry of how they make, in a very limited space, how they were packaged those four valves into that head. It is just amazing, and that comes from their expertise with small displacement motorcycles. So really, that engine was a jewel of an engine, but really didn't get into. It really didn't have a kind of, let's say, home to make it a super hot hatch. And I don't think the 800 definitely was a right fast car.
Exactly.
I think they could have done a lot with the Zen and, others which we talked about earlier.
So it's like the exact opposite of the Altroz. I mean, it had the engine and nothing else. The Altroz has everything else, but not the engine.
Yeah, that's right. I think so. And, I think going forward, I think hot hatch is what EVs make the best cases for a hot hatch because, you can just dial up a lot of things quite easily. You don't have to worry so much about emissions. You don't have to worry so much about efficiency. And I think Tata Motors have also said that, they could have an EV hot hatch in the Altroz at some point, which I think makes a lot of sense.
That could fix the problem you're just mentioning. Actually, everything.
Exactly.
Performance, the gearbox.
Absolutely. But I think EVs as let's say, soulful performance cars still not quite there because, just the linearity, that one-dimensional kind of feel of the way they perform. It's not like you have, but one is a turbo, one is a naturally aspirated. It's just that the intensity of acceleration is different, but it all kind of feels the same.
It's all the same, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, still, to have that, to be pinned in your seat, to have your head slammed against the headrest, it's only an EV that can do it to you in a way an ICE can't.
And manufacturers are doing it. I mean, we've had Renault reviving the Renault 5, which was actually a hot hatch way back. Now with EV, with electric, Alpine are doing a hotter version of it. Right. So they are coming back. I think Volkswagen have an ID3, a hotter version, also a hot hatch in there. Fiat have something called the EZ, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. I mean, EVs seem to be, at least in Europe, they're going to the EVs to hot up the hatches and
absolutely. So maybe then we will have a hot hatch. So really, I think what we've talked about is looking at this kind of smattering of hot hatches which have come our way. Really, we're not a market for hot hatches. Let's be honest, because as I said, at the end of the day, reality bites, practicality bites, fuel efficiency, cost, small volumes. When you have small volumes, it's not feasible then to productionize it. And it becomes very, very challenging. And we saw that, even with the earlier crop of hot hatches, they all had to go because of emission norms. Baleno RS went, Fiat, the Punto Abarth went, the Tiago JTP went, all in one shot, just gone. All hot hatches just gone that way. I think the only one that survived that time was the Polo. So I think the 1 liter Polo. But again, that really wasn't a hot hatch. That was a mainstream car. But I think, we haven't had the kind of culture of hot hatches the way Europe has had, like with the Golf GTI. And I think going forward, it's going to be a different world. I don't even know whether hatchbacks as a category is got that much appeal. So, performance will be seen in other kind of body styles. We're already seeing performance SUVs. I mean, today a Fronx is pretty quick, but it's nowhere a hot hatch. Fronx is even quicker than the Altroz Racer in a straight line. So it's going to be, I think the hot hatch as we know it. I don't think we'll see too many of those. Market is changing, and I think what we will see are, if at all, if they are electrified. But the hatchback segment has to kind of stick around for that to happen.
True.
So anyway, I think a great little bit of our perspective on what we think is the hot hatch scene in India. To be honest, not very hot. It's been warm at best, lukewarm generally. And clearly, I think the way forward is going to be electric as far as performance goes. So that's it from us this week. Do stay tuned and see you again next Saturday, same time.